No banks, no fees, no inflation. These are the potential perks of this thing called Bitcoin.
I think that something like Bitcoin is really important.
Bitcoin is worthless artificial gold.
Bitcoin is digital property, but without the risks and liabilities of commercial real estate.
The reason why people are so scared about them is the ability that they can't be traced, the anonymity of it.
It's like P2P file swapping. Hit the music industry. This is the P2P file swapping of money.
I would short it if there was an easy way to do it.
You can never have too much Bitcoin. We're big Bitcoin bulls.
It can be pretty difficult to get a sane answer from social media. About anything, really. There's an army of people competing for your attention. The more extreme their views, the more attention they can grab.
America deserved 9/11, dude.
It ends up dividing opinion on important topics into two angry extremes.
Hear us out.
With very little middle ground.
We need to kill the Harabis.
It is an inferior culture in all ways.
And Bitcoin is no exception.
Greatest Ponzi scheme in human history.
I close it down.
Yet it's been around for a long time. Long enough to write its own story.
Don't leave. Where you going? Come back. Hear us out. Don't leave.
Free from any sensationalized takes or personal agendas, just facts that make objectively clear its mostly negative or mostly positive impact on the world. A story it's been making since 2009 to justify its own existence. The question is, does it? There are many places where this story could start. In 1971 with the Nixon shock, ending gold-backed currency. In the 1990s with the various attempts at a digital currency, such as e-gold or B-money, or even the digital market economies of games like Ultima Online and Diablo, or October 31st, 2008. In the wake of the greatest financial collapse seen for 100 years, it was in this financial rubble that a pseudonymous person appeared. A man, woman, or group, no one can still say for sure, highly secretive in nature, they simply went by the moniker Satoshi Nakamoto. They would propose to the world an alternative. They called it Bitcoin. A digital currency that could be sent person to person without the need of a central bank. It had been thought of before, but Satoshi was the first to figure out how to do it without the need of a central server or control from a singular authority. Figuratively standing on top of the rubble caused by financial authorities could not have been a better backdrop for this proposal. What greater time than this to offer to the world a better, more transparent, and incorruptible financial system? Or a terribly twisted irony that only more of the same corruption, if not worse, was yet to come. Almost immediately, people would have an answer. Just 5 years after the launch of Bitcoin in January of 2009, the network has now gone from 2 users to an estimated 1 to 5 million. In much the same way Jesus experienced a mass following in the beginning only if bread was involved, this small community of mainly passionate enthusiasts of the technology became dwarfed by a new mass audience interested in something else Bitcoin seemed to offer: money. This was no accident. Satoshi had rigged the system to do this, predicting that it could occur long before Bitcoin even had a price. But I don't think anyone could quite have imagined what would happen next. To put just how crazy things got into perspective, GameStop Mania, an event which sent its stock prices soaring from $17 to a peak of over $480, was an incredible 2,700% gain. Tesla launched at $1.59 and peaked at over $400 in 2021. A monumentous gain of more than 25,000%. If you had the incredible fortune to invest into Apple at their launch in 1980 until their peak, that would be a percentage gain of nearly 200,000%. So how do these compare to Bitcoin's growth? Other than the electricity cost of producing them and processing transactions, a process known as mining, Bitcoin was essentially free. That was until October 2009, when a Finnish computer science student sold 5,000 Bitcoin for $5, giving each Bitcoin a monetary value of mere fractions of a penny. from that to over $1,000 per coin represents a mind-melting 111 million% gain. In case you're wondering, to the highest price recorded so far for Bitcoin, that $5 investment would have been worth 345 million. So the self-congratulatory and euphoric feelings held by all those who had believed in Bitcoin were self-evident.
People are fascinated by anything that makes new highs every day for weeks on end, which Bitcoin has done.
Imagine how good it feels to be a Bitcoin millionaire.
All of a sudden, I'm like the most popular kid in school.
But they were about to have a rude awakening.
Tokyo, Japan, home to a humble online trading card business called Magic the Gathering Online Exchange, has at this point in time grown into a worldwide financial behemoth. To reflect this newfound power and shed its very humble origins, the name was hyphenated to simply be Mt. Gox. If you wanted to buy or sell Bitcoin using your bank account or weren't tech savvy enough to understand or trust in peer-to-peer transactions, you had to use an exchange website. And if you were around at this time, you very likely chose this one. An approximate 7 out of every 10 Bitcoin transactions made worldwide at this time were likely trades made by users on this exchange. A lot of power and therefore responsibility for one small online company. Perhaps never to be replicated again. A topic for another video.
At the time, it was not uncommon for users to keep every single Bitcoin they might have owned on a website just like this. It was simply the most convenient storage space. Yet the risks of doing this are even more obvious than you might think. In 2011, Bitcoin fell 99% in a single day because Mt. Gox had been hacked for millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. In 2013, Mt. Gox was hacked again, causing an 83% crash in price. Perhaps it was through ignorance, perhaps through arrogance in the community, thinking that they were just too big to fail at this point, which made what was about to happen all that more shocking and financially devastating.
February 7th, 2014. Mt. Gox suddenly and without warning halts services. While users could still log into the platform and even make trades, no one could withdraw any of their own money. The reason? Technical issues. Users would question how this could happen to the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world.
Mt. Gox say they have all, sufficient funds, that the funds, the Bitcoins, the fiat currency is safe.
There doesn't seem to be any commitment or any kind of hope that they'll sort anything out anytime soon.
Confusion and panic would immediately sweep over the entire community, causing Bitcoin's price to plummet on other exchanges. February 10th, Mt. Gox issues a press release. In it, they aim to reassure investors and the public, stating that pausing withdrawals was simply a necessary but temporary security measure to protect their customers. In this communication, they would go on to take no formal accountability for any negligence on their part, but rather laid the blame entirely at the feet of the Bitcoin network itself. An issue so systemically critical, they claimed, they would have to work alongside Bitcoin developers to fix Bitcoin itself before they could re-enable withdrawals for users of their exchange. A rather odd claim to make, considering other exchanges were even at this time fully operational, and Bitcoin had seemingly run without issue or any significant technical changes since launching in 2009, yet not a claim made entirely without merit. Picture contactlessly paying for something. Your payment succeeds, but the printed receipt looks weird. The cashier is now confused if your payment actually went through or not, and in the worst case scenario, you're asked to pay again. In essence, this is what could be done on the Bitcoin blockchain, the software that records every transaction ever made. So why is this such a threat for Mt. Gox and their customers? Say you're at an ATM, you make a withdrawal of whatever is in your bank account at the time. The machine spits out your cash, but suddenly it isn't sure if it actually gave you your money, so it still shows credit on the screen, despite standing there with the very real money in your hand. So you withdraw again, and then again, and again. The bank pays out these requests from what little money it keeps in storage, and then starts to use their other customers' money they've deposited to be able to fund these withdrawal requests. Mt. Gox is afraid of being that ATM, and that's what they are alluding to when they claimed they had to fix a critical issue with Bitcoin, now known as transaction malleability. Yet this explanation would immediately draw scathing criticism from many in the Bitcoin community, including Bitcoin developers and other security experts. They claimed that the transaction malleability bug was a quirk of the system, and that any properly implemented accounting practices and security measures could easily navigate around this issue. From all claims levied at the Mt. Gox team, perhaps the most damagingly was that this was not in fact a newly discovered issue, but had existed and was known about for years. So this was either a profound display of embarrassing incompetence from the world's largest Bitcoin exchange, or a thinly veiled cover-up for fraud. Despite these damning allegations, user funds would remain frozen, and no further updates would be given from the Mt. Gox team, at least directly. February 24th, 22 days after first pausing withdrawals. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt swirling around for millions of affected Bitcoin users was going to get worse still. The Mt. Gox website suddenly went blank and was unresponsive. Despite the severity of the situation, it would not take long before everything would go from bad to catastrophic. February 28th. Just a few short weeks ago, Mt. Gox might have boasted a valuation in the billions were they a publicly traded company. Yet they would end this same month filing for bankruptcy. Their total collapse now made public and official. Taking a look at the bankruptcy documents that they submitted to the government, we see all involved were seeking protections to avoid suffering legal consequences for losing their users' funds. All of their users' funds. 450 million at the time, to be more precise. This newfound financial hope for many had ended almost as rapidly as it had sprung up. Yet we know this is not the end of the story. History might not repeat itself, but it can rhyme. So why was this financial devastation, one of the largest thefts in history, not the end of Bitcoin? Mark Karpeles, CEO of the now defunct Mt. Gox exchange, to this day maintains his innocence. His defense was multifaceted, but quite simple ultimately. Pin the majority of the blame on Bitcoin, not on any negligence he or his team might have displayed. It's been a mixed but mostly effective strategy. He has avoided serving any jail time thus far, but the financial harm caused by his once trading card website was far worse than his prosecutors could have imagined at the time. The largest theft to have ever occurred in modern financial history is commonly believed to have been that of Bernie Madoff's Wall Street-endorsed Ponzi scheme, which was initially reported to have lost 65 billion of its customers' funds at the time of its collapse in late 2008. However, when accounting for falsified reports of generated profit, as in reality no profit was actually ever generated, the real-world consumer losses were in the vicinity of 18 billion. At Bitcoin's peak valuation thus far, the amount stolen from Mt. Gox would have been roughly $58 billion. Bernie Madoff needed 30 years to grow as large as it did. Mt. Gox needed just 4. In the immediate aftermath of this collapse, the critical takes of Bitcoin being tantamount to a Ponzi scheme started to gain widespread acknowledgement, if not agreement.
It is totally, absolutely crazy, stupid gambling.
You have to really stretch your imagination to infer what the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is.
It's just like I've got cash in my wallet now. There's no way of insuring your Bitcoins against loss. It's one of the big fears about it.
If you and I buy various cryptocurrencies, they're not going to multiply. They're not going to be a bunch of rabbits sitting there in front of us. They're just going to sit there. And I got to hope next time you get more excited after I bought it from you, and then maybe I'll get more excited and buy it from you. And actually, we could sit in the house by ourselves, and we could keep running up the price between the two of us. But at the end of the time, there's one Bitcoin sitting there, and now we got to find somebody else. And they come to an end.
Those that bought in at the beginning and sold before the end may have made ludicrous returns on their investments, while many more lost everything they had. Very similar to the conditions you would expect to see at the inevitable end of a Ponzi or pyramid scheme. This new financial hope had been exposed, the very worst aspects of the finance industry wrapped up in digital form, the devil itself.
Customers of Mt. Gox who, were using Mt. Gox as their Bitcoin bank have lost their savings.
They haven't answered anybody's support requests. They seem to have just taken people's money.
But who or what was truly responsible for this disaster? The incompetent or corrupt powerful few, or the system itself facilitating such behavior? In the subsequent years that followed, popular public opinion on this matter would become increasingly clear.
Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin.
The most important characteristic about Bitcoin is the fact that it is hard money.
You've talked about Bitcoin is going to become the global reserve currency. I don't think that governments go down without a fight.
Thanks to the invention of Bitcoin, for the very first time in the entire history of the world, any human being can now send and receive any amount of money with any other human being anywhere on the planet.
Well, we don't need the banks anymore.
Bitcoin and crypto more generally are a humanitarian force and can help undermine tyranny.
It's a long-term property strategy. It's not a short-term trading strategy.
Why would you own Bitcoin if you could own the US dollar?
I ultimately believe that people are going to opt for something that is not manipulatable, is not seizable, is not censorable.
I'm really excited about Bitcoin because many people used to ask me, they would say, well, if these fiat currencies are going to collapse, what's going to come in its place? And I always used to say, the free market, private enterprise will come up with a solution, whether it be gold or silver or something else. And Bitcoin is the first free market private money created. It's a completely electronic currency. There is no central Bitcoin server, so you can't, the US government right now definitely sees it as a threat. They're trying to shut it down any way they can, but they can't. It's a beautiful thing. It's not based in any one location. It's like a torrent, and there's no way to actually shut down Bitcoin.
The people had spoken. Within just 1 decade, Bitcoin would go on to accomplish one of the craziest feats even the world's most recognizable brands couldn't easily scoff at. For instance, 1.8 billion servings of Coca-Cola are estimated to be drunk per day. Marlboro sold 240 billion packs of cigarettes last year. McDonald's makes 6.5 million burgers every day. And a supposedly collapsed Ponzi scheme with no physical product to back it went on to achieve a peak market cap of over $1 trillion. A milestone that took the likes of Amazon and Google over 22 years to achieve took Bitcoin just 12. How? What belief fuels the growth of such a deeply questionable asset? From a report commissioned by Coinbase wanting to know the very same. There is a consensus in the US that the global financial system is unfair and favors powerful interests, a sentiment that cuts across all demographic groups. Americans recognize that changes to the system are needed, with the majority indicating major changes are needed. And the major financial change commonly referred to by Bitcoin believers is one of the biggest imaginable, replacing the United States dollar as the world reserve currency. Truly an absurd proposition, but not one made without any merit. The belief common in the community is that as Bitcoin continues to climb in value, the poorest countries in the world are incentivized to use and store it as part of their financial reserves, and so on and so forth, till the world's highest governments are forced into using it, at least in part. Wars have been fought over far less, but with Bitcoin being essentially invisible, could it be stopped? It's a threat even the White House specifically addressed.
Cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin have been exploited to support billions of dollars of illicit activity like cybercrime, tax evasion, extortion, ransomware, illicit drugs, human trafficking. many players have attempted to use cryptocurrencies to fund their malign behavior. This is indeed a national security issue.
It's a hope that only the most devout of believers ascribe to currently, but even a commonly held belief is that crypto will be globally used for good. Continuing from that same report, a majority of crypto investors believe that the best days are still ahead, that cryptocurrency is a worthy investment for the future, and that it will be broadly beneficial for society to address inequality in the financial system. If Bitcoin was truly to become the world reserve currency, as its strongest proponents seem to suggest it has all the potential to become, then they could not repeat the mistakes of the past. While not a strictly fair comparison, if the existing world reserve currency had approximately 11.5 trillion in circulation and Bitcoin became similarly valued, then a comparative theft, such as the one Mt. Gox suffered, would have been like a thief running off with over $1 trillion. That a trillion with a T. So is the entire Bitcoin user base at just as much risk today as they were in 2014? Or have they learned from the lessons of the past? The answer is they probably haven't. According to data from Glassnode, Bitcoin stored on exchanges reached a total peak in May of 2020 of more than 3.2 million coins. More recently, there has been some improvement, but still about 2.3 million Bitcoin sitting on there. So while there is certainly a lot of Bitcoin on exchanges, which is a cause for concern, they are more widespread in their distribution than they were in 2014, with no exchange today having held as much as Mt. Gox did at over 850,000 coins. Well, at least technically. Bitcoin held by Binance, the world's largest Bitcoin and crypto exchange today, which boasts billions of dollars in trade volume daily, held a record 692,000 coins from its users in April of 2023, valued at the time at around 20 billion. Crazier still, by the end of 2022, Binance dominated Bitcoin trading, accounting for 92% of all trades being made. And according to a 2022 report from Binance themselves, they hold 74 billion in total crypto assets. This means that Binance has become inordinately larger than Mt. Gox ever was, more than 150 times larger. Like a modern-day prophet of this movement, there's a lot of faith placed into this one business. Despite this harrowing imagery, Bitcoin enthusiasts may argue that this is not a like-for-like comparison. Mt. Gox held over 6% of all available Bitcoin at the time, and today Binance holds perhaps closer to 3%. There is also a lot more legal clarity to the space, unlike in 2014. Some exchanges are even publicly listed companies on the New York Stock Exchange. Things are just a lot safer now, right? Perhaps the most significant thing about things being different today than it was back then is the example of what happened with FTX, but not for the reasons you might think.
My job is to make sure that we do the right things at the end of the day, one way or another.
You said FTX has a responsibility to seriously consider stepping into the time to save companies. Why did you have that sense of responsibility?
It's not fair to customers, and it's not going to be good for regulation. It's not going to be good for anything. From a longer-term perspective, it's just that was what was important.
How did you get the uptake at scale so fast?
You know, it was really just a lot of small things put together, a lot of decisions that we've made around how to build the product, trying to be as responsive as we can to customers, to regulators, to counterparties. In the end, it's the mark that we actually leave on the world, not the mark we're perceived to leave on the world that matters.
FTX was one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges with over 1 million users and was the third largest cryptocurrency exchange by volume. But in what heavily echoes of Mt. Gox, user funds had been funneled elsewhere, customer withdrawals were suspended, and soon after, they would file for bankruptcy. They lost an estimated $9 billion of their customers' money. Despite the flagrant fraud evident in the case, the former CEO of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, maintained his total innocence, laying the blame on inadequate risk management and that the reallocation of customer funds were well within the bounds of the user agreement customers must sign when first registering. The obvious shortcomings of this defense were not successful this time, with Sam Bankman-Fried being handed down a theoretical maximum prison sentence of over 100 years. But the bankruptcy rocked the crypto world. The price of almost all crypto assets immediately began to nosedive following the bankruptcy announcement news. The fallout of these events has rippling effects throughout the industry to this day. Yet another major change from today to 2014 was soon evident. Following the collapse of the Mt. Gox exchange, it took Bitcoin 2 years to regain the faith and trust of the people and achieve the valuation it had before the crash once more. And now, an arguably much larger exchange and even more obviously fraudulent than Mt. Gox was, took Bitcoin 2 months to recover from. Wherever you happen to fall on the issue of Bitcoin, being either the great financial revolution of our times, simply tantamount to a scam, or somewhere in between, the great demand for Bitcoin is evident in its continued steep valuations despite these major tragedies. In fact, in an ironic twist of fate, this demand could be galvanized in part because of these major tragedies, still not being enough to stop Bitcoin. So what could now? How do we marry the concept of Bitcoin being used as a tool to cause financial devastation on an increasingly large scale with the concept that it's a revolution for the good of humanity? Even if the price continues to climb, as history suggests that it probably will, wherever you sell Bitcoin, your money just comes from someone else, perhaps just like you, that bought it. Their loss becomes your gain, a zero-sum game, a reductive argument to make, but not one without any merit. So how then could this ever be a positive movement people continue to believe in, sometimes deeply and passionately?
I grew up in the US and I see all these people like, yeah, nuke everybody in the Middle East and kill them all. And then they have the former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright on 60 Minutes, one of the most popular news shows in the US. And they asked her, they said, like, there's reports that more than 500,000 Iraqi children have died as a direct result of US sanctions. And she looks back at her with a straight face and she goes,
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Worth murdering 500,000 kids because of what the government did? And I apologize for crying, but it just disgusts me from my core when I see government people murdering people around the world. It's not just theoretical. These are real people with real lives, and it's real people, and Bitcoin has the power to undermine everything they're doing to people around the world. And they do it through central banking and through the control of the money supply, and Bitcoin takes that away from them.
What if I told you Bitcoin's creation was more of an inevitability than random chance? That its success was entirely predictable? That despite any number of its flaws, there still remains a greater need in the world for a system just like it, and that this need only grows with time? Well, if you believe that, it's likely because you believe in one peculiar but very well documented social phenomenon. I like to call it time to corruption. Is a freehand way of explaining a repeating pattern. A pattern where almost any governing system will begin to misuse their authority if simply given enough time. Much like an unstoppable entropic force, time to corruption suggests that eventually power corrupts, just corrupts at different rates. We see it when the interests of the powerful few begin to take precedence over the well-being of the powerless many. Examples of this are almost everywhere throughout history. In the ancient Chinese dynasties of Han, Tang, and the Ming, where land holdings were being held increasingly in the hands of wealthy nobles and officials, heavy taxation, mismanagement all caused significant strife in their empire, leading to widespread revolt and decline. Or in medieval European kingdoms, the feudal relationships between the lords and their vassals initially provided mutual benefits of work and protection, but due in part to the aristocracy exploiting the serfs and commoners through their desire for excess, this relationship eventually collapsed. Or the extravagance of the French royals disregarding their people's strife that eventually was the fuse for the French Revolution, and on in almost all cultures and societies on Earth. Consolidation of wealth and power eventually becomes the primary concern of those few in authority, instead of having the interests of their constituents principally in mind, even if, ironically, that was the primary purpose of their given authority in the first place.
We beat Farmer this year!
Over 11 trillion. That's trillion with a T. $11 trillion in revenues. Nearly $2 trillion of actual net income or net profit from this stuff.
It's a fairly nihilistic belief that society is creeping, even if slowly, towards degradation. Yet that's exactly what millions of Bitcoin users have somewhat expressed. It is, for many, a type of financial rebellion against it. Even if they're not confident that Bitcoin will replace any normal currency in the future, they'll support it because it seems right. It seems good. But is Bitcoin actually effective for a rebellion? Does it accomplish any actual good in this regard? From the outside, it can seem like people only want to use it to stay even more entrenched in existing systems. A common mantra of Bitcoin being, when Lambo? Perhaps this question of rebellion is never so poignantly demonstrated than by the tragic history of one particular South American country. Venezuela, 1970. A beautiful and wealthy country, home to the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, even beating that of Saudi Arabia's, where filling up your car famously is cheaper than milk or even a bottle of water. But with a country so deeply reliant on its oil industry, the discovery of new reserves, other advancements in extraction, and a global trend toward more fuel efficiency all put the economy of Venezuela in tremendous peril. For 2 decades straight, the cost of anything, including essential goods and services, could as much as double year on year. With widespread allegations of corruption and economic mismanagement, Venezuelans were disillusioned with their political leaders. A total financial reformation was needed, which set the path to power for the newly elected president, Hugo Chavez, a charismatic speaker who addressed the country's poor and working-class citizens promising radical reforms. A Bolivarian revolution. He painted himself as the outsider to bring real change to the traditional political mold. Exactly what the people wanted to hear and desperately needed. Much like at the very start of Bitcoin, what greater time was there than this to introduce to the people a better, more transparent and responsible financial system, or in a terrible twist of irony, that only more of that same corruption, if not worse, was yet to come. In the immediate years following President Chavez's election, things appeared to be improving until 2003, where that and each year that followed were just as bad as they had been in the 80s and 90s. In an attempt to rectify or simply exploit the situation, the president, along with the Central Bank of Venezuela, began to remove personal freedoms from their citizens, all under a thinly veiled explanation. It was for the good of the people. Starting in 2004, it became a crime for private individuals and companies to buy foreign currencies, something many people previously did to escape the worst devastations of inflation. The president, in an attempt to prevent immediate mass protests calling for his removal from office, promised his people that they could still apply for permission to regain the right to trade foreign currencies. It was only later that people realized how shallow a promise this was. If you or your business were part of the wealthy elite, you likely got the extremely rare approval to buy and hold foreign currencies through the Venezuelan central bank. If you were not rich and powerful, you would have to turn to the black market. In so doing, you would risk fines, imprisonment, and/or total asset seizure by the government if caught. But it was simply the only option for many Venezuelans to avoid financial ruin. Official figures on the black market exchange rate are of course not available, but in a study conducted by 2 professors of finance, they estimate that during the mid-2000s, the cost of buying US dollars for the average Venezuelan was 2 to 3 times higher than normal international rates. And by 2014, it is estimated to have risen to 50 times higher. Did this and other sweeping extension of powers by President Chavez and his government end up being worth every sacrifice for the ultimate good of the Venezuelan people? Nepotism, embezzlement, human rights abuses, bribery, suppression of the press, and a lack of transparency were commonplace. The very governing bodies that had been democratically given power to help the economy had used that power to destroy it instead. Sympathy generated for the economic hardships of their people should have been enough to at least slow the seemingly entropic forces of the time to corruption principle, yet ironically, if not tragically, its effects were only hastened. It's difficult to contemplate the financial devastation that occurred throughout the 2010s, but to visualize some of it, I have in my hand 1 million Venezuelan bolivars in a single banknote. In 1970, this amount of money was worth just under $250,000. But I have a 200 million note and even a 500 million. And today, these can't even get you a loaf of bread. The inflation we suffer in the Western world, while still being devastating to the poorest among us, is like an idealistic dream in comparison to the living nightmare of the average Venezuelan, even to this day. By 2017, inflation had skyrocketed to over 1,000% for the year. 2018, over 1,000,000%, and 2019, 10 million%. Building up any cash savings in these conditions is impossible, but as most businesses could not keep up with inflation, what many people even earned immediately in the first place was almost nothing. Unsurprisingly, by 2020, more than half of all transactions occurring in Venezuela were being made in US dollars. Many of those dollars came from people who had escaped the country and were supporting their relatives who were still stuck there. But there was one financial lifeline many would later rely on, being developed over in England. A small team of two brothers and their childhood friend would go on to create an innovative, borderless financial payment system, if entirely by accident, where estimates are that millions of people would come to benefit from it. This financial lifeline would come from one of the most unimaginable places.
What type of people play and enjoy RuneScape?
Oh, I mean, there's a huge range of demographics.
The most popular free MMORPG in the world.
It's not a game where you stand still.
In what sounds like a poorly written dystopian movie, but is entirely real, over 1 million people would come to rebel against their oppressive financial system by earning and selling on sites like eBay, one of the earliest versions of a digital currency ever made. Not Bitcoin, but RuneScape gold. As one Venezuelan told Polygon, "Over time my salary became less than $4 a month and I just couldn't do anything with it. So I decided to try a game my neighbor was telling me to play for money. For me, without RuneScape, my family would have starved." The rise of the internet has eroded the borders between countries and peoples to varying degrees. The new freedom to share information to almost anyone in the world had great potential for new, better systems to be developed, even if they were emergent, unintended ones. The system that RuneScape had facilitated, in essence, was that players who had the time and patience to sink into it could earn and sell a digital representation of that time to someone else in the world who would value it. It's as if a grand arbitrage between time and money could now take place through the internet, where major imbalances between the two could now be more equitably distributed, even by regular people. If one person in the West earns $30 an hour at work and has 2 hours spare to play RuneScape of an evening, they might think buying gold for $5, which otherwise might have taken him the whole evening to earn himself, has pretty good value for his time. What starts for one as a small price to pay to avoid monotony becomes a lifesaver and time well spent to avoid poverty for the other, all facilitated through the borderless nature of the internet. This is why a seemingly privileged Westerner point of view, claiming crypto as a whole to be tantamount to a scam, is only half the story. You could say that no one should play RuneScape. Spider-Man 2 is objectively a better investment of your time. That might be true for you. That might even be true for most people, but clearly not everyone. To fairly judge Bitcoin's impact on the world, we need to look at its impact globally.
Using your credit card to buy stuff, that is so 20th century.
Former PayPal CEO Bill Harris called the cryptocurrency, quote, the greatest scam in history.
Cryptocurrency is designed to empower the individual with the idea that they are the data.
Money can be sent from here to Hong Kong and back instantly for free.
Just a self-fulfilling referential bubble with no link to anything in the real world.
RuneScape might demonstrably have been a force for accidental good, but Bitcoin is not a like-for-like comparison. You can't work all day to earn something to sell, or can you? They are oddly more similar in nature than you might think. The same emergent system of RuneScape time being traded for dollars through the medium of digital gold is in essence the same system that the Bitcoin network is built on. If a RuneScape gold coin is proof of someone's time and knowledge spent generating it, then the process of creating Bitcoin through mining is proof of someone spending time, electricity, and technical knowledge to generate it. You could do the work yourself, or you could buy the product of someone else's work. So on a very fundamental level, you could say that the same principles giving RuneScape gold a value are the same principles that give a value to Bitcoin, a concept known as proof of work. But is proof of work really enough to give it its own value? Bitcoin is a resource and time-consuming to create, so it has a value, and it has a value because it's time-consuming to create. That's a circular argument that proves little. I can write a lot of time-consuming words, but that doesn't necessarily give them a USD value, unless you think they're valuable to you and your situation. Venezuela has some of the cheapest electricity in the world, so its people might have benefited tremendously through mining a digital currency free from the devastations of hyperinflation that the central bank couldn't block their access to. Unfortunately, many people in poverty simply cannot afford a computer to do this. It would not be an option. But for those Venezuelans that could, they in essence could take back their broken trust and reliance in corrupt politicians to maintain value for their currency and put their trust and reliance into the mostly unchanging code that governs Bitcoin and its ability to maintain its value. Except for the fact that their government in 2020 moved to outlaw private mining. Instead, you would need approval first, and if you meet the long list of criteria, then you must join their particular mining network known as a mining pool, which the government controls. A setup where they can dictate how much you earn and even withhold payments entirely, potentially without you even knowing about it. All done with a thinly veiled excuse that it's for the safety of the people. With such wild potential for corruption and huge historical precedent for it, it would almost be funny that they're doing this if it weren't so sad. While Bitcoin was innovative, being the most free transactionary system from authoritarian control ever made at its launch in 2009, that does not mean it has been immune to the principle of time to corruption. As we've seen, Bitcoin is far from free by at least indirect authoritarian control, where your trust in valuable services that utilize it can be broken, and where even using your computer to mine it can be considered a criminal offense punishable by fines, asset seizure, and even imprisonment. Yet some still take these risks, believing the benefits to be worth it. Even the most critical people on Bitcoin would find it hard to claim that there hasn't been at least some level of utility in it, for certain people under certain conditions, globally speaking. Not if they're trying to be objective anyway. One could still make the claim though that for many, if not for most people in the world, that Bitcoin is practically useless and shouldn't be valued nearly as high as it is, not a claim made without any merit. For most in the West, very likely you who are watching this right now, there's little demonstrable benefit to having yet another payment system. There's Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay, and free banking services on top, which for the vast majority of the time at least, don't steal your money or block your transactions and are more often than not faster, cheaper, and more convenient an option than Bitcoin is. So a borderless payment system, mostly free from authoritarian control, that depends on no third parties or the continued popularity of a 20-year-old video game, might not make any tangible difference in the lives of many people in the West. maybe for money launderers. But is there actually a legitimate need in the Western world for something like Bitcoin? Perhaps, again, this question is no more poignantly addressed than by the life and example of one particular activist who attempted to hold powerful entities accountable. That man's name is Julian Assange.
Julian Assange is not your average journalist or publisher, and some have argued that he's not really a journalist at all.
Well, he's not exactly a bastion of truth and integrity.
I was a famous teenage computer hacker in Australia, and I've been reading General's emails since I was 17.
The High Court in London has, at least for now, blocked the extradition of the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to the United States.
We spent a long time hearing the United States putting lipstick on a pig, but the judges did not buy it.
I was involved in 2007 and 2008 at looking at what was happening to Iran.
He says he's the victim of a conspiracy to punish him for exposing US crimes.
He has to answer for what he has done.
We are subverting illegitimate authority.
WikiLeaks! I love WikiLeaks!
Senior politicians are calling Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist and an enemy combatant.
Mr. Assange has already paid a significant price.
We still love WikiLeaks.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing.
We've got breaking news for you, and I have to tell you the pictures are shocking from London today, where Julian Assange's long standoff with international authorities is finally over.
This precedent means that any journalist can be extradited for prosecution in the United States for having published truthful information about the United States.
People ask what gives me hope. Well, the answer is right here.
There are many quotes given by Julian that, in essence, reference his belief and deep concern of the time to corruption principle. He believed access to truthful information is essential for democratic societies to function, and that secretive or opaque systems lead to corruption. It was motivated by these beliefs that he founded WikiLeaks in 2006, a place where whistleblowers could anonymously leak classified documents, all funded by public donations. But it was in 2010 that the site would first gain significant attention. Thousands upon thousands of classified documents from the US military were leaked, and the revelations contained within would raise significant questions about the government's foreign policy. Particularly concerning was the true extent of the civilian casualties throughout the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, a fact often going unreported in the news media. Julian would later claim that every war in the past 50 years is a result of media lies, and if wars can be started by lies, they can be stopped by truth. While he is commonly viewed as a champion of truth for his actions, he is not without his detractors. There are some who believe Julian had recklessly endangered national security by exposing these classified documents and had put other lives at risk. Not least among these detractors was the US State Department, which quickly sought to shut down WikiLeaks through cutting off their access to these public donations. Financial services like Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal all began to block any donations made by the public. In a move that would scare away the creator of Bitcoin themselves, never to reappear again after this, WikiLeaks began accepting Bitcoin donations in 2011. In so doing, Julian had circumvented the financial blockade and received significant financial support from doing so. So is there an objective benefit to Bitcoin even in the Western world? It's another payment processor, but don't the existing ones work for most people? Time to corruption is historically real, but would Bitcoin do anything meaningful about it? Did Bitcoin empower Julian Assange to actually curtail any more death and destruction, or, as the US State Department asserted, had only caused more harm?
Do you know in this last week of any direct link between these leaks and an attack on an Afghan or on a US soldier?
What I don't think people that aren't in the military and in conflict understand is the danger of these kinds of leaks, the ability to net together what is seemingly information that may not be related, and then to take advantage of it. And I think it's irresponsible and could very well potentially end up in loss of life.
Is Bitcoin good or bad, righteous or evil, a scam or an anti-scam? I can point to significant events surrounding Bitcoin and allow you to come to your own conclusions about it. But I could also sit here and point to several instances of leaded gasoline having great benefits to the global economy, a demonstrable force for good. I might even get some of you to agree with me, but all the while, the truth is, it's literally killing people. A bad thing fundamentally, sometimes used for good, doesn't not make it still a bad thing. And this is the heart of the issue. With so many claiming Bitcoin is nothing more than a scam, that means the small good it might be used for is ultimately not worth the cost. The two most common comparisons Bitcoiners receive is pyramid scheme or Ponzi scheme.
Bigger because everybody that you bring in, they're going to bring in
somebody.
somebody.
So I start here.
Yes.
And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. What did I just make, Andy?
But how deserving is Bitcoin of this Ponzi scheme label? Comparing it to the classic Ponzi introduced to the world in the 1920s is about as definitive an answer as you can likely get. That original scam purported the following: investment leads to practically guaranteed returns. Returns on investment far outstrip what's common. A story for legitimacy is used, but all an illusion. A heavy focus on recruiting new investors. The source of your gains comes directly from other investors. It's working perfectly for now. Well, case is closed. I guess my work here is done. Nothing looks so similar to a Ponzi in the financial world than Bitcoin does, except for the collapse part, but there's still time. Why is the music coming back? Investment leads to practically guaranteed returns.
So we think they just need that new product to get people excited about Tesla once again.
All in, we're still, looking at this company as disrupting the auto industry and having an opportunity to have outsized incremental margins and earnings power here.
I've never been more bullish about Tesla.
Returns on investment far outstrip what's common.
I believe we will at one point next 3 to 4 years be talking about Tesla, not just at 1 trillion, at 2 trillion.
A story for legitimacy is used, but all an illusion.
It felt like they were dialing it in. They had promised these things and were going to deliver them, but it just didn't feel like it had the hype that we had a couple of years ago.
A heavy focus on recruiting new investors.
At this point, I think I know more about manufacturing than anyone currently alive on Earth.
The source of your gains comes directly from other investors. It's working perfectly for now.
Overwhelmingly, our concern is how do we keep the factories operating so we can pay people and not go bankrupt.
Okay, the case is reopened. Legitimate investments can share similarities with Ponzi schemes. They're meant to look like legitimate investments after all. It's part of what makes them so successful. One of the best ways to sort out legitimate from scam is the saying, if it looks too good to be true, then it usually is. Bitcoin, objectively, does not sound too good to be true. Maybe at one point, but not anymore. This video thus far should illustrate that fact. Even if it does go on to become worth a lot more in the future, lives would have been ruined in the process. Bitcoin is also commonly known as extremely volatile. This is important because Ponzi's typically overwhelmingly only have good stories about it before the end. Only people ever making money with it. There is no evidence of harm. There is no volatility, no losses. These are antithetical to a Ponzi's camouflage. Bitcoin, in stark contrast, is a very mixed bag, which, ironically, in this light, makes it more credible, at least in resisting the label of Ponzi.
I want to tell you something. Faith and belief is the one thing that we all need to be able to change the world. And right now, I believe that in this room, we have the seed that's going to germinate and that's going to explode into an amazing opportunity for us to change this entire world.
Another fundamental difference is that Bitcoin is, objectively, not at all good at disguising itself as a legitimate investment. The sheer fact that it is open about not being backed by anything is a preposterous idea and quite the opposite of legitimate looking. It's completely transparent in how it operates. Now, you might argue that it does pose itself as legitimate. But you'd be wrong. The White House calling your investment a threat to national security is about as wildly far away from legitimate investment as you could possibly imagine in the mainstream. Bitcoin is not a Ponzi scheme. There are too many fundamental aspects of it which run in stark contrast to the generally agreed definitions of this financial scam. But what about it being a pyramid scheme? One by one, here are the definitions. Is it a financial fraud? Daily scam revenue is in the tens of thousands, but it's an open ledger anyone can verify for themselves. Recruitment focused, it costs approximately $100 million to move Bitcoin up or down 1%. That's like trying to recruit people to buy Apple stock so your investment in them can rise. Promise of high returns? These are marketers trying to promote the use of third-party services which pay them bonuses. Payouts require more recruits. There is an exchange rate on currencies. Trading them is not considered a payout. Why should it be different for digital currencies? No genuine product? There's an estimated 10,000 computers running the Bitcoin software worldwide, and the service has been running without interruption since 2009. Unsustainable. It's been over a decade now and seemingly still going strong. So, by definition, Bitcoin is not a pyramid scheme either, especially once you separate the third-party marketers from the equation. But what if it is still fundamentally a pyramid? According to many reporters, about 95% of the Bitcoin supply is held by about 2% of its users. If in fact true, this would completely dismantle the idea that Bitcoin is decentralized. A quick look at the ledger that is Bitcoin also seems to support this idea. This is a system that feels quite familiar. Yet there are multiple problems in trying to get a true estimation of Bitcoin's distribution. But according to a detailed report by Glassnode, a company which sells crypto analysis services, they estimate the typical retail investor makes up around 25% of total Bitcoin ownership, with that figure growing. Still very much a pyramid in distribution, just not as large as some might claim it to be. If we examine the distribution of any capitalist system, be it currency, stocks, property, commodities, they all tend toward a concentration of wealth at the top. It's inevitable when money can be used to make more of itself, and returns just compound over time. It's part of what the game of Monopoly was trying to demonstrate. It's a strategy that Michael Saylor, a man much adored in the Bitcoin community, takes advantage of directly. He's taken out loans in the hundreds of millions of dollars to buy Bitcoin while using his already existing Bitcoin holdings as collateral.
Well, I think the challenge is if you wait for a decade for everything to be cleared up, the price of Bitcoin is going to be 10 or 100x more than it is right now. So you have to choose whether or not you want to enter knowing that there are about a dozen things that are going to mature the asset class and make it more transparent, or whether you want to wait for all those things to take place and then pay a much higher price when it does.
So Bitcoin being called a pyramid is not wrong, just as calling the modern financial world a giant pyramid is not strictly wrong either. The reason the world doesn't collapse overnight from this realization is, in part, because many don't understand it.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles, least of all stockbrokers.
Institutional investors, they have almost unconsciously subscribed to the dogma that the stock market will always outperform, and even though if you have a bad year, it will recover next year.
The forecast is doom and gloom on the economic front.
So if you got a client who bought stock at 8 and it now sits at 16 and he's all happy, he wants to cash in, liquidate, take his money and run home, you don't let him do that.
Come on, we just made the deal of our lifetimes. We should celebrate.
You just bet against the American economy, which means if we're right, people lose homes, people lose jobs, people lose retirement savings, people lose pensions.
Revolutions, you follow? Revolutions. Keep the clients on the Ferris wheel. And it goes. The park is open 24/7, 365. Every decade, every century.
As Henry Ford put it, it is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe that there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. But he said that in 1937. And today, considering the large percentage of the Western population no longer believing that their systems have their best interests in mind, more people are perhaps beginning to understand. But it's more complex than just ignorance. As Morpheus in the Matrix movie explains,
and many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it.
Or, to use a more professional reference, as American writer John Steinbeck put it, the poor see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Despite the unfairness of the system and the statistical probability of it remaining that way for most, many still have faith that the system will work for their benefit too. Ironically, the early implementation of financial systems were designed specifically to rely on faith as little as possible. The dollar was essentially a redeemable voucher for its equivalent in gold somewhere in a vault. Today, things are far more abstract. Today, a dollar has value because we believe it has value, but not blindly. The American economy has done very well historically, and should something truly threaten the dollar's value, well, wars have been fought over much less. For this, and many reasons besides, there seems little reason now to not believe in the value of a dollar. It would no doubt take very exceptional circumstances before people no longer trust that, but every economic system in the modern world requires trust, and arguably at an ever-increasing rate. With events such as trillions being printed in 2020 to stimulate the economy, and the ballooning US debt expanding so rapidly, you can begin to question the very meaning of money. Still, Bitcoin is one of the most belief-reliant financial systems ever created, not just in the traditional investment world, but even within its own sector. The very code Bitcoin runs on is completely open source, and many copycats have sprung up over the years. Today, there are tens of thousands of different cryptocurrencies, with an estimated 5 new ones being made per day. Most are considered a joke, but genuine competitors have emerged. Some of these newer cryptocurrencies demonstrate the ideals laid out in the Bitcoin white paper even better than Bitcoin does. Ethereum, the world's second largest cryptocurrency, is believed to be capable of 30 transactions per second, and BNB, the world's third largest crypto, boasts thousands of transactions per second. Bitcoin can do roughly 7. Truthfully, many of these newer cryptos might claim they are faster, cheaper, capable, or more equitably distributed than Bitcoin is. On its own, Bitcoin is slightly dated cryptographic software originally adapted from the torrent client, an online file sharing method that is stored on multiple computers, and not much else. Yet the people's belief is clear. Even within its own advancing sector, Bitcoin is many multiple times larger than its closest competitors in terms of their respective market caps. Contrary to how most technology platforms perform, Bitcoin becomes more valuable as it ages, not less so. This is not without some logic though. The biggest hacking bounty in the world, where a successful exploit would reward a hacker with what would feel like all the money in the world, is the Bitcoin code itself. Like an elusive carrot, this prize dangles in front of the world's most advanced computer hackers. So each year that Bitcoin continues to operate without impedance displays its resilience. It displays its potential to be a safe store of value. It increases belief. Even so, that argument might explain why Bitcoin could retain dominance over other less tested cryptocurrencies, but does little to explain why it should be dominant over other real-world assets. They inherently require less belief to maintain their valuation. But much like how you might avoid criticizing Bitcoin for demonstrating the inevitable results of capitalism, you might also avoid criticizing Bitcoin for demonstrating the fragility of human psychology.
Allow me to demonstrate. Let's take a piece of pure gold. We believe it to be valuable because of its rarity, because of the difficulty of extracting it from the earth. Cultural significance. It looks shiny. And many more reasons I could list, so on and so forth, yet it serves no critical need for me, and something vastly cheaper, like a bottle of water, is so useful it could be the difference between life and death. Now, you could state that this is an oversimplification, that it comes down to supply and demand ultimately to determine value, and while it is true, it's probably not as true as you might think. Let's take platinum, for example. another precious metal sharing many of the same properties that gold does, but platinum is stronger, has a higher melting point, less reactive, more useful in industry, shinier. It's hypoallergenic, meaning that it's better for people with sensitive skin. It's much harder to extract and is found much deeper in the earth. In practically every conceivable way, it's superior. It's even rarer than gold. Despite this, gold is far more valuable. So, belief is king, even over laws that supposedly govern us, like logic, reason, or supply. And this irrationality doesn't just apply on a small scale. It applies to the largest scales too.
The illusion has become real, and the more real it becomes, the more desperate they want it. Capitalism at its finest.
Over the past few months, the price of gold has been going haywire.
It's just money. It's made up. Pieces of paper with pictures on it so we don't have to kill each other just to get something to eat.
In the stock market, there's a term given when a particular social phenomenon is demonstrated within a company. They become known as a blue chip, a freehand way of expressing that fundamentals are becoming less important to maintain their valuation as belief is just that strong. To illustrate, we see a premium on almost all of the stock prices of the largest companies, an overvaluation of prices over what traditional financial analysis suggests they should be. This trend is only growing, hastening the rate at which wealth is being concentrated at the top. The reasons for this are varied. It's possible that the analysis is incorrect. However, more crucially, these companies have proven their worth as a store of value. They have been operational for years and have shown strong performance. There's now a widespread belief that, despite inevitable economic turmoil, funds invested in them should not only be preserved but also grow over time. This belief, by virtue of its popularity, turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy. The peace of mind this offers becomes worth the premium, and even more significantly, the avoidance of loss justifies any premium. According to a well-known psychological study, the pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. Another study again found that losses are felt more deeply than gains, even when they are of identical size. While these findings cannot be applied to everyone, they do offer a potential answer for why we see what we do in the investment world. In essence, an investment vehicle that purports the potential for gains is attractive, but is rarely enough on its own. What makes an investment almost irresistible, even to the point of paying a premium on what it should be worth, is if it's a safe store of value as well. Warren Buffett once said his first rule of investing is never lose money, and his second rule of investing is never forget rule number 1. Considering the volatility of Bitcoin, shouldn't human psychology be working against it rather than for it? This is the investment vehicle, after all, that within the past decade alone has posted eye-watering losses. Hardly a good demonstration of being a safe store of value, but maybe that's just cherry-picking data. Assuming you were to buy Bitcoin on any singular day of its existence, you would have over a 90% chance of being in profit today. But maybe that's just cherry-picking data again. Assuming then, you were to buy Bitcoin on any singular day of the past 5 years, you would have a 78% chance of being in profit today. Is that actually any good? To get an objective answer, we can make the exact same 5-year comparison with the FANG stocks, traditionally seen as blue chip safe havens. At 78%, this would generally place Bitcoin in a riskier asset class when compared to the more traditionally known safe haven investments. But this is not the full story. When we compare the gains made within that same 5-year period, we see another form of risk, the risk of opportunity cost. Bitcoin on average was 30 times more profitable an investment to make than the traditional safe haven assets were. Again, a circular argument that proves little. It's valuable because it's going up in value. My point here is to illustrate the power of belief systems, even overpowering fundamentals to a degree. Even if fundamental analysis tells you Bitcoin is a house of cards,
It's going to topple any day now. It's increasingly difficult to form the conclusion that this analysis was right. There's a popular myth that illustrates this quite well.
There was once a scientist who took it upon himself to study the flight of bees. Using the sophisticated principles that govern fixed-wing aircraft, he proved mathematically that bees couldn't fly. But bees, being ignorant of this fact, fly anyway. It's a little ironic then that a system that relies so deeply on belief rather than material backing to ascertain its value now benefits so much from this approach. But this is the secret of its success. It's a model the USD adopted itself in 1971, but hasn't taken quite as far as Bitcoin has, but it is getting increasingly similar rapidly. Is it truly reasonable to criticize Bitcoin and its high valuation? If another system had come along and demonstrated utility, resilience, and dependence over a decade, had amassed millions of users, was relatively low risk historically speaking, and was one of the best performing assets of the last decade, then you'd be Facebook, and no one would think your valuation was unjustified.
So Bitcoin does not get the same pass as Facebook might, because it does not generate cash flow. But neither do dollars. It's how they're used that's important. In an effort to illustrate, allow me to introduce someone I've been excited to introduce you to. This is my daughter. Can you say hello? My wife suffers from a fairly common condition that meant us having any children was unlikely. There is medication prescribed in the US to treat it, but it's not available here in the UK. As it's not an approved drug, no business can legally sell it even online. But some accepted Bitcoin because of its pseudonymity and legality in their own country, and so we were able to get it. This means Bitcoin can be used to buy harmful substances, but it also meant that my daughter could be born. And I hope no one would make the argument that Bitcoin is a scam or has no value fundamentally. To me, that's demonstrably untrue. Perhaps in a similar vein to the right to bear arms in the US being believed to be some sort of expression of one's right to freedom, then perhaps Bitcoin can be one's right to some financial freedom. Albeit a small one for most of us in the West, I'm still very glad that it exists. It's up to us to determine whether that freedom is used for good or for ill. But I do have hope that we will ultimately choose what will be good for Bitcoin. Can you say bye-bye?
Bye.
A lot of you are skeptical, a lot of you don't believe in the Bitcoin system, and that's fine. You can stay on the sidelines, but if you really, really want to become wealthy in the future, I would suggest you take $1 frickin' dollar.
Si tú quieres comprar un medicamento que en Venezuela no lo hay y no tienes cómo acceder a otras divisas, las criptomonedas son una manera de llegar a tener esa posibilidad de hacer esa compra.
So I was losing a lot of business and a lot of clients. And then when I came across Bitcoin, that was my penny drop moment. I was like, okay, this is exactly what I needed.
Literally put in a trade, wait a few hours, let the exchange rate fluctuate, and I'm actually able to profit from the world's largest financial market in the world.
Virunga has become the first national park to run a Bitcoin mine, all with renewable energy, in order to continue funding efforts to protect its forests and world-renowned wildlife.
As Bitcoin continues to grow and ever more people begin to accumulate it, those who have this knowledge will have an edge over the rest of humanity.
A few days ahead of the GoFundMe campaign shutdown, the Bitcoin fundraiser by Canadian Bitcoiners started to go viral. They've raised up to 22 Bitcoin so far on an open Bitcoin-only crowdfunding platform called Tallycoin, where donations go directly to the recipient without any intermediary in between, making it impossible to seize the funds.
Bitcoin, when I heard it the first time, someone was approaching me with some kind of MLM. But when I actually digged into it deeply here and I understood what Bitcoin actually is, also from a tech point of view, I understood, well, this is actually solving all the problems the monetary system right now creates.
I just told people I wanted a pizza and I want to pay with Bitcoin. I didn't want a gift card. I didn't want some weird exchange. I want to give you Bitcoin and you give me pizza.
In October, a feminist coalition in Nigeria raised the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin to buy gas masks and protest equipment as activist bank accounts are being turned on and off.
Eric, it's heaven, and I guess congratulations for making a lot of money for seeing something or investing quite early in the cycle.
And then you have all of the problems with the current monetary systems, and the Bitcoin system is so perfect that I think it's going to be the future.